It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
To a man and author, his name is Dan Perkins. He's a storyteller, a master storyteller. He's the author of the Brotherhood of the Red Nile trilogy, which centers around Islamic nuclear terrorism against the United States. He's a nationally recognized expert on radical Islam and also a contributor to the Daily Caller, Clash Daily, LifeZet, Newsmax, TheHill.com. Dan, welcome to the program this morning. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. So first of all, just tell us a little bit about this book, The Brotherhood of the Red Nile. The subheadline here, the subtitle, A Terrorist's Perspective. I was just reading a little bit about it on Amazon. It sounds intriguing.
It's actually a series of 3 books. Actually turned into 4. Normally a trilogy.
Oh, all right.
Yes, I don't know what happened.
Nope.
Anyway,
go ahead.
Wrote the trilogy, and people were so interested in the characters. They said, you can't leave us here. You got to write a 4th book. So I wrote the 4th book. But the original series is a trilogy. The first book is called A Terrorist Perspective. The second book is America Rebuilds, and the third book is America Responds. The first book, The Terrorist Perspective, was written primarily to begin to help people understand, Americans and people all over the world, why the Muslim and the radical Islamic Muslims hate us so much and why they want to kill us. And it's an insight into the Quran, into Sharia law, and it's a story about a new terrorist group that's formed in central Syria. I should point out that this book was started in February of 2012, and the terrorist group is formed in the central Syria town of and they have developed a strategic relationship with the Iranian nuclear program to convert 2 old Soviet Union suitcase dirty bombs into nuclear weapons of mass destruction. Why I tell you that when it was started is that in writing that book, I wrote it in 2012, and several years later, ISIS was formed in the town of and I believe it has a working relationship with the Iranian nuclear program. So it was ahead of its time. The 4th book, which is called Ted Baker and Terrorist Gold, a continuation of the story, was written in 2015. Again, it's important to understand the date. And what happened is that book is the story about how the Russians get control of the Democratic candidate for president in the election. And so both were somewhat prophetic.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, good grief. That's amazing about the very prophetic about the ISIS situation. I mean, could you believe that? I mean, are they reading your books and saying we must activate this plan? I mean, what's going on there?
I believe that most of the messages that I write in my book are given to me by, and the inspiration is given me to the Lord, because He believes there's something I need to say to the broad American people. And I really think in the terrorist perspective, when you begin to understand, I mean, I've asked this question for 5 years of people like yourself, and I don't do it to embarrass you or your audience, but I asked the question, what do you think, being as honest as you can, percentage of your audience has ever read the Quran or Sharia law? What'd you get?
The percentage of my audience, it's definitely got to be below 10%. I mean, I think at the same time, there's probably folks who know things about jihad, taqiyya. They know aspects of Sharia law, but they may not have actually sat down and read it. I mean, I actually haven't ever sat down and read the Quran. I have just read, portions of it maybe reprinted in books about understanding Islam.
Right. No, and that's terrific, because, but in a sense, if let's say your number, you would be the highest I've ever heard, but that's okay. You may have I probably do have a very intelligent listening group. But the point is, even at 10%, that means that 90% of the people have no idea who these people are, why they hate us, and what it is about us that they want to destroy.
Mm-hmm.
And so the book is to begin to try and help the American people understand a lot of the fundamentals of the religion and how it impacts the decisions that they make about us. When they say they want us to death to America, it's not a slogan. It's a philosophy. It's a belief of how they need to act. And so what we have to understand is that we think of America of a place of where people come from all over the world into the melting pot and assimilate into the great American culture. What we don't understand is that under the Muslim faith, they are prohibited from assimilation with Christians and Jews. So they're never going to assimilate truly into our culture. They are constantly going to try and change our culture to their culture.
Yeah, and I've certainly read in some history, the idea that Egypt was a Christian nation, and through immigration, that all changed. We're seeing that the immigration issue with play out right now in Europe. Interesting, you mentioned in your book you had this concept where the Iranians are using nuclear facilities or secret nuclear facilities in Syria. I mean, there certainly are reports of that happening. I'd love to get your thoughts, Dan, on what do you think Donald Trump, how do you think he's handling the terrorist situation? And also when Benjamin Netanyahu came out with that press conference a couple of months ago, it just systematically exposing how the Iranians are still pursuing, nuclear technology and how bad the Iran deal was. Can you just kind of speak to the geopolitical status right now?
Well, I think that what we have is Donald Trump understands as a business person, one of the fastest way to bring about change is to create a change in the economic conditions, good or bad. In our country, he's worked very hard to change the economic conditions after 8 years of Obama. And we've seen what it's done as a result of the tax bill and other things where we have a stronger economy, we have more people at work, we have companies coming back to the United States, new companies coming into the United States, building facilities and hiring Americans. By the same token, he understands that if you penalize an economy, sometimes if you do it long enough and hard enough, you can exact the change that you're looking for. So when he was running for office, he talked about the nuclear deal with Iran and how bad a deal it was. When he decertified it, again, this is a matter of record, what he said to the other parties at the table, I'll give you 90 days to see if you can cut a better deal. And the 90 days came and went, and they didn't do anything. So we have now the situation where Trump is enforcing more severe restrictions, and you're beginning to see the vestiges of a significant uprising of the Iranian people against the government. Now, that is a direct result of the pressure that Donald Trump is putting on their economy by beginning to cut down their export of oil, which is they're the third largest exporter in the world. It's an economy that's based very heavily on the revenue from oil. And what we have is a situation where President Trump is using economic power to bring about change, and he did that in North Korea. They may not be moving as fast as he wants them to, but they're going to test him all the way through the process. And now we have a situation which is quite historic, which nobody seems to be writing about in Iran, and that is that the Iranian people are openly protesting the government. Now, what's important to understand about that is that under Sharia law, and Iran is a Sharia nation, the religious leaders, the imams and the mullahs, are in charge of the government. They are the government. So in the first time of history of the religion, the religious leadership is under attack from the people. This is unprecedented. Now, that's a result of what Mr. Trump is doing. We saw this past weekend where Mr. Trump has been very firm about tariffs, and look what's happened. It looks like we're going to have a new NAFTA deal with at least Mexico, and I think Canada will be right behind. The European trade people have already come in to want to cut a new trade deal with the United States. And a week or so ago, the Chinese realized that we are their largest trading partner, and the sanctions and the tariffs that Mr. Trump put on are damaging to their economy, so they're coming back. So Mr. Trump is using economic power of the United States by growing the economy, making it even more desirable for foreign nations and foreign corporations to want to do business here. They have to change. And that's what he's bringing about change, whether it's in Islam or whether it's in the trade relations with foreign nations. He's using America's economic power to bring about change in the relationships for the good of the country.
It's remarkable. I completely agree with your sentiment there. I do have one question, though. Back to the Iran situation and the fact that they are openly, protesting their government. They did this once in the Obama administration. The Obama administration gave them no support, gave them no help. I'm wondering, when it comes to Iran and the idea that they kind of have their finger on the button, they want to wipe Israel off the face of the map. Where does Russia play a role? And the reason I ask that is because, like you said, the North Korea situation is not moving as fast as we want, but it certainly is huge. There have been giant moves in that. And the president met with China first. You meet with China first, and then the president came out with this rhetoric about Rocket Man trying to, and he knew he had the support of China. And then they had the Helsinki meeting with Russia. Nobody wanted it to happen. But I noticed that right after the Russian meeting, he started going after Iran. Is there a correlation there?
Oh, sure there is. I mean, Putin understands that the leadership in this country today is dramatically different than it's been for probably 30 years, and that we have a history. We don't want to seem to engage. We're looking for ways to withdraw under Obama. America needs to lead from behind. And the world, from a practical standpoint, the world is a better place, a safer place, when America leads from the front, not from behind. And so what the leaders of Europe have experienced is a country, the United States, where the leadership wants America to lead from behind. Keep in mind, Trump's only been in office 18 months. And look at what he's facilitated in far as changes. But it takes time for the foreign leaders to understand how serious this man is about what he wants to get done. So he has to prove himself initially. And through these various situations in trade or whatever, he's proving himself as a leader of not only the United States, but the free world. And as such, it takes a while for other governments to really understand that he's serious. It's like the second gas attack in Syria, and we responded. A lot of people were waiting to see whether or not Mr. Trump would respond. And I believe that the Iranians were involved in orchestrating, along with Assad in Syria, the second attack, simply for the purposes to see whether or not Mr. Trump would do anything. Was he going to be a paper tiger like Obama and draw a line in the sand and never do anything about it? So every time he does one of these things and he puts a stake in the ground or a line in the sand and then enforces it, the world begins to understand that the sheriff in charge of the United States is a serious guy.
Yeah, you're exactly right. We're talking with Dan Perkins. He's the author of the book, The Brotherhood of the Red Nile. It's a trilogy, but it's now more than that. I guess what would you call it? A saga, because there are 4 books. So and
there probably will be another one too. So,
that's fantastic. Yeah. That's fantastic. Hey, real quick, last question, is we're running out of time. I really appreciate your time. Hey, what are your thoughts? You being an expert on radical Islam. Some of there's other people we've had interviewed. Mr. Spencer of Jihad Watch on the program before, and he had his donations, a Patreon donation, shut down. We have a real problem. It seems like the tech companies are really cracking down on this concept of free thought, voluntary cooperation, the free exchange of ideas. I think that they lost the election because there was too much freedom on the internet. We had David Horowitz's organization, Visa and MasterCard, shut him down last week, but they have since restored him. What are your thoughts on free speech moving forward as we get closer to this midterm election?
Well, I can tell you from firsthand experience that Facebook shut me down in April and has never letted me come back in. I've appealed 3 times. I can't sell any of my books through Facebook, and I'm very angry at that because I don't believe that the private sector has the right to limit free speech in this country. The government doesn't limit free speech. Why would we allow corporations who over the weekend have said they're going to get together, collude together to try and figure out the strategy for what they're going to do at the midterm?
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a problem, and I think the idea that a political agenda can get control of and decide what is going to be free speech or limit what people can say, that has to change. We will no longer be a free country if we allow the private sector to decide what can be said and what can't be said.
Do you think there needs to be some antitrust action here where we say, hey, some of these companies are monopolies?
I've written that very fact. I've written stories about what's going on at Facebook, and there are a lot of people who tell me, well, we need to create a competitor. You can't create a competitor. If you understand the magnitude of what they have, nobody's got the money to go in and even put all the infrastructure in place just even to begin to compete. So I think you have to come to the conclusion that this is in fact a monopoly, and it needs to be broken up under Sherman antitrust to allow competition to come in.
Dan Perkins, I appreciate it, sir. It's great to meet you. I really appreciate your insight. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to look forward to it again.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Want to do this again. Folks, Dan Perkins, go get his book, The Brotherhood of the Red Nile. And, again, there's 4 of them, probably going to be 5. And you heard what he said. He basically, in 2012, wrote about what would, a terrorist group forming in Syria, and that ended up being ISIS later on. And, just very prophetic things he writes about that tend to come true. That's fascinating. Folks, this is Conduit News Radio. We're going to be back in just a moment.